Hey there, deep divers. It's Julie B, and today I'm bringing you part two of the deepest of dives into the electrifying penultimate episode of The Handmaid's Tale, Execution. A masterpiece, in my opinion, including the arrest of June, the epic gallows scene, Serena Joy's remarkable shift to the side of the revolution, Aunt Lydia's redemption arc, and Commander Lawrence redeeming himself in the end. In part one of this deep dive, I explored the shocking demise of Nick Blaine and why I think it was necessary in the end. Because a star-crossed romance is not what this series is really about. Nick made his choice, and he chose Gilead by taking that flight with the Warhawks, so June had no choice but to let him go. And the show is frankly better off, because an epic Hollywood romance was a distraction from the overall message and purpose of this series. This is, and has always been, a tale of an indomitable woman going to war against a dystopian regime that's enslaved her and stolen her child. Now let's take a look at the rest of the heart-pounding episode 9 of season 6, the final season of The Handmaid's Tale. After the Mayday plot to drug Serena's wedding cake in episode 8, the posted handmaids are on a rampage, executing phase 2 of their plan. Literally executing, killing their commanders and their wives once the sleeping meds from the cake had kicked in. Having just fled from her new home with Wharton, Serena Joy is running down the street with her baby when she's shocked to see a handmaid killing her commander's wife outside their house. During the attack, the handmaid calls out the wife for being guilty of SA, because the wives aid and abet in the monthly SA of handmaids, literally holding their arms down, let's not forget. Meanwhile, June leads the Red Center handmaids, who had been released by Aunt Lydia in a shocking turnaround, toward fortified getaway trucks to take them to Canada, noting that Mayday had taken over a checkpoint at the border. But June and Moira plan to get off the trucks early to stay behind and see this fight through to the end, and Janine insists on joining them because, like June, she still has a daughter who's trapped there. So it sounds like June will continue to fight in this revolution indefinitely, unless she can manage to get Hannah out. But I'm almost certain that's not going to happen. There definitely won't be a tidy, happy ending to this series with a family reunion for June and the fall of Gilead in the span of one episode, but at least we'll see the beginning of the end of Gilead. However, before they can make it near the border, the group is stopped by Gilead guardians, who force everyone out of the trucks at gunpoint and demand that June Osborne give herself up. Meanwhile, Serena's impossibly good fortune continues as she manages to escape the carnage going on across Boston by running to Lawrence's house with her baby. Never count this woman out. She always lands on her feet somehow. So does June, but at least in June's case, she puts in great effort to succeed, while Serena keeps getting lucky. The next morning, Serena is surprisingly sympathetic to the handmaids, even after witnessing one killing a wife. Naomi tells Serena they never should have let the handmaids into their homes because they hate them, and Serena actually responds, "Yes, wouldn't you?" So she's actually feeling empathy for them, and as I said in my episode 8 deep dive, it seems that she's finally opened her eyes and realized that the handmaid system is wrong. Naomi responds that the handmaids killed 37 commanders, and while Serena doesn't condone that, she responds, "You know what they've had to endure." Again, this is more empathy that shows actual growth, finally, even in light of the murders the handmaids just committed, making it even more impressive. Of course, Naomi is still clueless, debasing the handmaids as savages and saying Gilead has given them every necessity and opportunity for redemption. Redemption for what? They're innocent women who've been enslaved, not fallen women, according to Gilead's religious propaganda. But anyway, clueless Naomi insists to Serena that they need their men to protect them in the wake of the massacre, so she's called Wharton to come over and see Serena. The cold and calculating Wharton turns on the charm with Serena and talks down to her, asking her to forgive him for speaking harshly to her the night before, wanting to reconcile with her. But again, showing growth, Serena stands her ground that he broke his vows to her by bringing a handmaid into their home. Then he offers to try having children with her and get rid of the handmaid. He also pulls the safety card and tries to convince her to come back to him for protection, telling her he arranged for escorts to bring her and the baby to a secure location along with the other wives and children outside Boston. But Serena is smart enough to refuse to go even deeper into Gilead, even after the carnage of the previous night. So he asks her to stay there and posts guardians outside, as he's leaving to convene the High Council in D.C. that night to plan their response. Wharton informs Serena that June was responsible for the plot to drug their wedding cake and distribute switchblades to the handmaids, which surprises her. She actually says, "I thought she was my friend," sounding incredibly naive. So, as it turns out, when Serena was talking to the handmaids at her wedding, telling them she believes that June forgives her and they're friends now, she actually wasn't lying like I thought she was. She's just that delusional. I mean, June literally just told her flat out that she can't forgive her a few episodes back, but Serena just blocks out facts that are unpleasant to her. From there, Wharton pays June a visit for no apparent reason other than to smirk at her and gloat, under the pretense of giving her an opportunity to make things right with God before her execution, as if he's a representative of God. In a satisfying back and forth, we finally get to see June, de facto leader of the revolution, confront one of the top commanders in Gilead on the utter hypocrisy and abuses of this abominable place. Wharton tells June that Serena had been working hard to improve conditions for handmaids, and June should have been more patient. But she retorts that there's no time for patience with state-sanctioned SA. He claims that Gilead is God's kingdom on earth. Then June brilliantly denounces it as a horror show run by men who are twisting his words, frauds. It's never been about piety. Indeed, Gilead is run by a pack of repulsive hypocrites who twist the words of the Bible to justify the systematic SA of enslaved women, then run off to brothels to engage in sex with more enslaved women. The fact that almost all the commanders frequent the brothels is proof that it's not about piety, as June says. Their religious dogma is just a guise to cover their true purpose, and that is for the men to wield as much power over the women as possible. Then this is where June, even in her incarcerated state and condemned to die, tells Wharton with confidence that this is the beginning of the end, because she believes that even without her, the revolution will continue and eventually Gilead will fall. If anything, killing June would only make her a martyr and bolster the cause. As viewers heading into the series finale, we should keep June's words in mind because obviously it would be impossible for the revolution to topple Gilead in the span of one more episode. It will take a much longer time to win this war, especially since it's a David versus Goliath situation, with American forces greatly outnumbered and outmatched. But in time, I'm sure Gilead will fall. Also, there's already a sequel series in production for Hulu based on the sequel book by Margaret Atwood. I think over time, Mayday will win over hearts and minds within average citizens, who we have rarely seen on the show, to the point where they'll be able to recruit these citizens and even some guardians potentially. When Wharton says he's giving June a chance to ask for God's mercy before her execution, June counters that Wharton is the one who should be asking for mercy after sending guardians to slaughter the innocent women of Jezebel's. As I mentioned in part 1 of this deep dive, when Wharton goes to leave, June grabs his arm and implores him to be the man Serena believes he can be, to choose love. Of course her plea doesn't work. She of all people should know that argument wouldn't work on Wharton, but she was really thinking about Nick. She desperately wants Nick to be the man she believed he was and choose love, to choose her and not Gilead. Serena and June wound up having this in common. Just as Serena had been blind about Wharton, June had been blind about Nick. Serena believed Wharton could be a good man and help her change Gilead, but she was sorely mistaken. And June believed Nick would always be her hero. Nick is not a villain like Wharton, of course, but he definitely chose Gilead over June in the end. In a sweet scene, Lawrence sees Naomi off with Angela, sending them to a secure location outside Boston for a few days. He gives Naomi the book he's been reading to Angela on the sly and tells her Angela loves to learn, that as her parents, they need to teach her. This goes against Gilead's rule forbidding women to read, but Naomi actually agrees to do it. Lawrence has always been affectionate with Angela, and this particular scene is especially poignant, as he tells her to draw him more pictures with lots of colors and kisses her goodbye. When they leave, the camera pans in slowly on a close-up of his face, full of affection for Angela, with the musical score also tugging at the heartstrings. Even cold-blooded Naomi tears up before she leaves, and that's when I knew this was building up to Lawrence's death, which indeed happens by the end of the episode. Later, Serena is extremely upset about June's impending execution, telling Lawrence she and her baby wouldn't be there if June hadn't saved them. Twice, actually. The two of them pray for her together, and it underscores how far these two characters have come to reach this point, the growth they've both experienced. In my eyes, nothing can fully redeem them for the grave harm they've caused for women throughout Gilead, as the architect, Lawrence, and the inspiration, Serena, behind Gilead, but it's nice to see growth and a change of heart in both of them. Then, in the most epic scene I have ever watched in the history of this series, June is led out to a platform full of gallows in front of a giant crowd, under a noose hanging from a crane in the center of it all, so they can make a clear example out of her. Wharton proceeds to recite a combination of prayers that make no sense to put together for this occasion, thus underscoring how he's twisting the Bible's words just as June had said. He begins with a line from the Lord's Prayer, which is well known for its portrayal of a loving and forgiving God. Then he jarringly pivots to some lines paraphrasing Isaiah 13:11, which is about God punishing the wicked for their iniquity and arrogance. Then, shockingly, he brings out Aunt Lydia and a large group of handmaids, including Moira and Janine, with guardians putting nooses around all of their necks, except for Lydia at first. The crowd of onlookers is abuzz with confusion and condemnation at the prospect of hanging handmaids, fertile women who are so valuable to Gilead. They consider this to be a sin. This is what they've been taught. And I foresee citizens of Gilead starting to turn on their leaders as a result of this, and joining the revolution. Wharton chastises Aunt Lydia for failing in her responsibility over the handmaids who carried out the previous night's massacre, and he allows her to atone before she's executed. But in an incredible turnaround, Lydia pleads with God to forgive her and her precious girls, the handmaids, then abruptly switches her tone and screams, "For they have been prisoners of wicked, godless men." What a stunning about-face for Aunt Lydia, who has been a devout, true believer in the Gilead cult from the beginning. But as I've said in my deep dives this season, Janine would be the key to opening Lydia's eyes to the depravity and hypocrisy of Gilead. Lydia was already starting to waver in season 5 as she went out of her way to keep Janine safe, breaking rules in the process. But this season, seeing the abominable way that Janine was being treated at Jezebel's and by Commander Bell, it finally started to fully wake Lydia up. So when June and Janine implored her to set the handmaids free from the Red Center, she actually gave in and let them go. Now Lydia finally sees the reality that handmaids have actually been prisoners of hypocritical abusers masquerading as men of God. What a phenomenal moment for Lydia's character arc, and it comes as a shock to everyone in attendance. Of course, Lydia can never undo the horrific damage she's done to the handmaids, the abuse and the torture that she herself inflicted, and the way she participated and was complicit in handing the handmaids off to the commanders. But it's still satisfying to see Lydia actually come over to the side of the revolution, and with such fiery vitriol for the commanders. Toward the back of the crowd, Luke and Rita appear and make their way to the front, and this is where I knew they had a plan to save June and the others in store. As Wharton condemns June and her actions, she asks for the chance to pray for mercy for her sins, and what follows is the most gripping, powerful moment I have ever seen on this series. In an emotional prayer, June says that she's failed her friends and her family with her selfish and reckless ways, and in this moment, I'm sure that she feels she has failed them, having taken on this revolution as if it's her responsibility to get it right. But now her friends all have nooses around their necks. Her husband is in grave danger in the crowd, and she's failed to get Hannah back. She begs God to protect his humble servants, to let them know their lives are worthy, that their hopes and dreams mean something, for they are good people. Then, lowering her head and slowly raising it, June's tone abruptly switches, and her facial expression turns from devastation to pure rage as she finishes her sentence. Who for too long have been oppressed by evil, and those who have disgraced your name. Rise up, fight for your freedom. While they hastily put a noose around June's neck to silence her, she fights to get all of these words out with every ounce of strength within her, and the last words she's able to utter before they hoist her by the neck into the air couldn't possibly be more fitting. Don't let the bastards grind you down. Wow. What an incredible, inspiring, and chill-inducing moment. And I have to say, it's my favorite moment in the history of The Handmaid's Tale. Recall that back in season 1, Serena imprisoned June in her room for such a long period of time that it was psychological torture. As June lay in the closet, losing her mind, she saw a carving, Noli te bastardes carborundorum, Latin for, don't let the bastards grind you down. It had been carved there by the previous handmaid at the Waterfords, who took her own life by hanging. And those words would go on to become June's mantra from that point on, the last message that handmaid sent before she hung herself, inspiring June to get back up and fight. If June had died, these would have been her last words too, her last message that's meant to inspire people to rise up in the way she'd been inspired. So it's fitting in more ways than one that June used her mantra in this moment. And it makes me believe that June will actually survive the finale, because there's no more badass way that she could have gone out than this. I can't imagine the show topping it. This was their opportunity to kill her off in the most impactful and fitting way, if that was their plan. So I foresee her actually surviving the finale, or at least having an ambiguous ending where we don't know what happens to her. As the crane hoists June up in the air, Luke and other members of Mayday in the crowd throw grenades and start fighting the Guardians, another incredible moment. Rita visibly struggles with committing violence, but she's come over to the side of the revolution after Nick went back on his word to help get her family out. She summons the courage to shoot the crane operator and get June down. And of course, who else is June's hero here? Again, it's not Nick anymore, it's Luke. Of course it was Luke. He's the one who loves her enough to put his life on the line in this amount of danger, engaging in actual combat against Gilead forces. Nick has never done anything close to this. He's only saved her or helped her in covert ways so he could protect himself at the same time. And as June's eyes open to see Luke there, taking an enormous risk to free her, despite his knowledge of her love for Nick, I think she's experiencing an awakening in more ways than one. She finally sees that Luke is the one who's worthy of her love, not Nick, as I explained in my first deep dive on this episode. As June looks up, she also sees some jets fly in while a member of the crowd exclaims, "Those are American planes." The musical score soars, and it's the most uplifting moment, with the American planes flying in and dropping bombs on Gilead. It feels reminiscent of Allied troops showing up to liberate prisoners from concentration camps in World War II. Of course, this is only the beginning, and there's going to be a long war ahead. But what a joyful sight to see America still exists in some capacity, and American planes are flying in to take on Gilead. And every single handmaid, June, Lydia, Luke, Moira, and Rita all survived this intense skirmish. Is it a bit unrealistic for this extremely violent skirmish to pay off so much? Kind of, to be honest. But after 6 seasons of trauma and suffering nonstop, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief, and I think we've earned a win like this. The characters and the viewers. Watching the Guardians just get taken out so easily here. In the aftermath, Mayday seems to have taken over Boston along with the American soldiers. Now, where did they come from again? Remember, Tuello had said he has to rely on Mayday because there weren't enough American soldiers left, but again, let's just suspend our disbelief on that and give them a pass. Predictably, June refuses to rest after almost being hung to death and gets right back in the middle of the action with Mayday. Tuello informs her he's put Serena into protective custody at the church across the street, and he thinks she knows more than she's saying about what the commanders are doing next. So June has yet another mission to undertake already, and she goes to see Serena, who, to June's surprise, is actually relieved and happy to see she survived the execution attempt. At first, Serena plays dumb about the commander's plans, and June calls her out, saying she really thought Serena had changed, but she's all talk. Then she goes on to make a smart argument, the best argument possible to appeal to Serena, invoking their children, their duty to raise them in a world filled with love, which can never happen in Gilead. This is an effective angle to take because children are the most important thing in the world to Serena, not just her own baby. Serena is obsessed with protecting all children, given the fertility crisis that precipitated Gilead. And this argument is the last straw for Serena to finally come over to the side of the revolution. She gives up the information on where the commanders are going, from where they're leaving, and what time. To be honest, I think this amount of growth for Serena is not really believable and feels rushed, especially because just a couple of episodes ago, she was writing a journal entry in which she said the handmaid system was necessary and misunderstood, and she sounded proud to have been called the mother of the revolution that toppled the US. June found this journal the next morning and looked horrified. Now, all of a sudden, in this episode, Serena's been expressing empathy for the handmaids who had just murdered commanders and wives, and she's giving up the plans of the commanders, including her new husband, knowing full well that the Americans or Mayday will likely kill them now, too. Now, it's true that Serena has undergone major changes over the past few seasons, from dehumanizing and abusing June to treating her like a human being and giving her safe harbor when she was on the run this season. She's also championed the reforms of New Bethlehem to give women more rights. But it's never been enough for me, and if the show wanted this extreme turnaround to be believable, we should have seen a journal entry in which she confessed that she was wrong, or at least that she's questioning her religious views on the necessity of handmaids. But no, she's still been drunk on her own Kool-Aid, believing herself to be a messianic figure chosen by God to be a leading figure in Gilead. A place that's rotten to the core and needs to be dismantled, not just reformed, to offer basic rights to read and write. Until now, Serena has never expressed a belief that the handmaid system needs to go. Again, it literally says the opposite in her journal, her recent journal entry. So she's still been thinking that state-sanctioned SA is fine as long as they're kinder to the handmaids, respect them as sacred vessels, and let them retire with dignity instead of sending them into forced prostitution at Jezebel's. She also just called handmaids sacred vessels at her bridal shower when the wives were putting them down. But in episode 8, Serena had an awakening regarding handmaids when Wharton brought one into their new home, suddenly telling him that handmaids aren't vessels, they're people. So now that she has her own child, she knows she's fertile enough to possibly have more, and she's had a handmaid forced on her household with a new husband she loved, suddenly handmaids are unacceptable to her. I still have to wonder if Serena would have ever had this change of heart if she hadn't been able to naturally conceive a child of her own, Noah. Remember, recently Serena had admitted to Aunt Lydia that when she was pushing the handmaid system in the beginning, before Gilead, she never even thought of what would become of them after their so-called service. She said she was just unhappy and wanted a child. Horrifyingly selfish. Serena was okay with having a handmaid and stealing that handmaid's child, June's child, when she thought she was infertile. Although, of course, she did look uncomfortable during the ceremony with Fred and June. I think she compartmentalized her feelings, but deep down, she knew in her gut that it was wrong. That's why she had to look away. And I'll give Serena credit for having given up June's baby to be smuggled out of Gilead to Canada in season 2. That was an enormous step in the right direction. June had convinced her that they couldn't let this little girl grow up in Gilead, stripped of basic rights, and despite how much she loved Holly, then named Nicole, she handed the baby over to June to get her out of Gilead. But then she took some giant steps backward and negated that action when she turned around and tried to get Holly back, making June participate in a stunt on national TV in which she and Fred pleaded with Canada for the return of the child. And then they went and led a giant prayer for the same purpose at what used to be the Lincoln Memorial, with a sea of handmaids in front of them. It was really only when Serena managed to actually get pregnant herself later that she finally backed off, accepted that Holly is June's daughter, and fully let her go. So again, Serena's redemption arc hasn't felt earned enough for me. Yes, she's suffered abuse at the hands of Gilead too. She was beaten, she lost a finger, and she was stripped of her voice. But she's never demonstrated true remorse for her role in inspiring the handmaid system and what she personally did to June. She's never faced true justice, always landing on her feet with impossibly good fortune. In a perfect world, every commander and his wife in Gilead should be in prison for SA, including Serena. And Serena was briefly imprisoned in Canada for just that, but it was in a luxurious suite, and it was an extremely short time before she was set free. So in my eyes, Serena can never be fully redeemed for her crimes without incarceration at minimum. Full stop. Serena seems to know in her gut that the handmaid system and the Gilead system in general were wrong, but due to her narcissistic nature, she couldn't bring herself to admit this. Even now, to herself in her private journal, that would mean admitting she was wrong and helped create a system that enslaves and abuses women. But the blinders are coming off now, and she's waking up to reality. Not quite to the same extent as Lydia, though. She has yet to decry the entire Gilead system in strong terms as Lydia just did, with her venomous condemnation of the commanders as wicked, godless men. Still, given Serena's narcissism, religious dogma, and her deep-seated need to make her late pastor father proud, Serena does a remarkable thing by giving up the plans of the Warhawk commanders to June, and I have to give her credit for that. She's finally come over to the side of the revolution and of justice. And like Lydia, Serena's immediate reaction after taking this huge first step is emotional. After letting the handmaids leave the Red Center, Lydia fell to her knees and pled with God to help her, as she's been brainwashed for so long and doesn't know what to do next. As for Serena, she doesn't utter a word after June leaves, but her face speaks volumes. Her eyes fill with tears and she looks upward. In her case, I'd say she's more drunk on her own Kool-Aid rather than brainwashed like Lydia, because she helped shape the religious dogma that Gilead follows. Still, she's been a true believer in that dogma, not a fraud. It's fitting that Serena happens to be in a church for this moment, as I'm sure she's deeply conflicted on what's right and what's wrong, whether she's just done something good or whether she's turned her back on God. As she looks upward, one can imagine she's praying for guidance as Lydia had done. So June takes this vital information back to Mayday as Tuello brings in Lawrence and offers up a mammoth task to him. They ask him to plant an altitude-triggered bomb on the commander's plane before they take off and then leave. Lawrence responds that this is out of his comfort zone, admitting that said comfort zone is minuscule. But this isn't the first courageous act we've seen from him. He once took June to see Hannah at the Mackenzies' house, an act that could have put him on the wall. He also smuggled Emily and June's baby out of Gilead, and would have smuggled June out too if she hadn't chosen to stay behind for Hannah. This action was also a capital offense, and Lawrence knew the risk he was taking. He was even willing to do what he could to help June after she told him in a fit of rage in season 5 that she had let his wife Eleanor die of an overdose without telling anyone. And then he still said Eleanor would have wanted him to help her. But by and large, Lawrence has stayed out of the fray and did what he could to help people, only while also protecting himself and his wife Eleanor when she was still living. He's never done anything as dangerous as planting a bomb, so he hesitates to agree. But June convinces him to do it, offering to go with him and see this through to the end together. She sees the potential in him for heroism, especially given what he's done for her in the past. When they arrive at the plane, June tells Lawrence, "Courage looks good on you, Joseph." Indeed it does. This is the most courage he's ever displayed after spending much of his life being a coward. He takes the bomb and utters a sentence no one on TV or in movies should ever say when walking into a life-threatening situation. "I'll be right back." That trope seems to jinx people every time, doesn't it? Because as Lawrence walks to the plane, the Warhawk commanders show up early, putting Lawrence in a bind he hadn't anticipated. He's then faced with the choice of getting on the flight and sacrificing his life, or abandoning the plan just to save himself. Tuello had told him that if they let the Warhawk commanders escape, the revolution will be over before it's even begun. So Lawrence knows that everything is now riding on him and what he decides to do in this moment. June looks on in shock, hiding behind Lawrence's car, knowing that he could torpedo their plan and give her up. He hesitates, then makes up his mind and pretends that he's come there because he wanted to join the other commanders at the High Council. But before he gets on the plane, he stops and looks over at June. In a heart-wrenching moment, his face softens with teary eyes and he puts his hand over his heart as if to say, "This is for you, June, and Godspeed on your mission from here." And June is teary herself in response, with a look of deep gratitude on her face as she locks eyes with him. Lawrence has been an ally for her many times, and she certainly can't ever forget that he was the one who arranged to smuggle both her and her baby out of Gilead. With that, Lawrence gets on the plane, going to his death, and in a surprise twist, Nick joins him, as I discussed in part 1 of this deep dive, and June is left to helplessly watch the plane explode before her eyes. The spectacle of that plane exploding like fireworks on the 4th of July reminded me of our American national anthem, specifically the lyrics, "And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there." After all, the whole reason we light fireworks on patriotic occasions is to celebrate America and the fact that our brave men and women have fought to make sure we remain free. And sometimes bombs were involved, which can rain down sparks just like fireworks. So this moment, as heartbreaking as it is, it's also bittersweet and has an inspirational side to it. It symbolizes and foreshadows the triumph of America over Gilead one day. As for Commander Lawrence, he has been one of the most complex and ambiguous characters on the show since he first appeared. He was technically the architect of Gilead, designing the system himself, although he never believed in the religious dogma side of it. The other commanders just used the dogma to justify the system, which they deemed necessary to combat the dire fertility crisis facing the world. As the architect of Gilead, this was poetic justice for Lawrence to die for the revolution against it, and he earned true redemption through his heroic self-sacrifice. He had admitted this season that he couldn't forgive himself for building this hellscape and trapping his beloved late wife in it. Lawrence was like Dr. Frankenstein unleashing a monster that he couldn't control, and he's been racked with regret over it. He just covered his emotions with his sarcastic quips. But he was deeply disgusted by the abuses against women in Gilead and never personally engaged in them. So he lived as a recluse with his wife for years, then only emerged as a leader after her death to honor his promise to her that he would fix Gilead from within. In the end, though, Lawrence realized that reform was futile and the only solution is revolution. And thus, when that revolution was in his hands at this pivotal moment, He chose to lay down his life for the cause. Again, Tuello had said that if they let the Warhawk commanders get away, the fight would be over for them before it even began, so everything was riding on Lawrence in this moment. And he chooses the right path, the path of justice. Nothing can ever excuse or undo the damage he did in his role creating Gilead, even if much of that damage was unintentional on his part. But making the ultimate sacrifice is the best thing he could do to redeem himself and honor his late wife. On the other hand, in my last deep dive, I discussed at length the fact that Nick chooses the wrong path, and he goes out as a coward choosing fascism over revolution. Nick even admits to Lawrence on the plane that June had tried to get him to give up Gilead many times, admitting that he actually did have a choice. Check out my deep dive on that topic for much more on why Nick needed to be eliminated. There's one thing I'd like to add about Nick, though, an example of how June had blinders on regarding who he really is for so long. In season 3, she begged Nick to make a deal with the Swiss and give them intel on Gilead, in return for help with making sure their baby daughter would be allowed to stay in Canada. She told Nick this is his one chance to be a father to his daughter, and he agreed. But then the Swiss refused to make a deal with him. A diplomat told June, "I don't think you know who Mr. Blaine is, or who he was. Our research indicates he is not to be trusted." The diplomat goes on to say that some people are not to be dealt with, referring to Nick, and tells June he's left for Chicago, where he had been tasked with leading Gilead soldiers in the fight against some remnants of the American military out there. Nick left without even saying goodbye to June or telling her he'd be leaving. Then, when June asks Serena what Nick did before he was a driver, something she should have asked a long time before since she knew he had been an eye, Serena tells her that he served Gilead by being a soldier in the crusade. Serena tells June, quote, "We wouldn't be here without him. All this time you spent together and he never mentioned anything," unquote. This speaks volumes about Nick's character. He served a pivotal role in the extremist crusade that created Gilead, and thus he has always been on the side of fascism from the beginning. And he never bothered to even tell June the truth about that, just as he didn't tell her that he was working as an eye when he was a driver for the Waterfords. So, as the Swiss diplomat had said, he was not to be trusted. But June still had to find that out the hard way, though. It's as if she just blocked out all of this information from her mind, compartmentalizing it because she didn't want to accept the reality regarding Nick. No matter what June found out about Nick over the course of the series, first that he was an eye, then that he was a crusader who helped topple the US government, then that he'd become a commander, June just blocked all of it out. But in the end, the blinders finally had to come off, and she had no choice but to finally let him go. Not only watching him die, but essentially watching this fantasy in her mind regarding Nick explode in the sky before her eyes. So, what's next? How can the series finale of The Handmaid's Tale possibly follow this monumental penultimate episode with something equally impactful? Well, honestly, for me, it doesn't even matter what they do in the finale that much at this point. As I said in part 1 of this deep dive, I think with this episode, the series has already landed the plane. Mission accomplished. We've seen June come inches away from death while calling on the people of Gilead to rise up. We've seen Mayday take over Boston. We've seen Lydia and Serena have awakenings and join the side of the revolution. We've seen June let go of her love for Nick and watch him die. We've seen Luke step up and put his life on the line to help save June. And we've seen Lawrence redeem himself by taking out the Warhawk commanders and making sure the revolution will continue. What more is there to do? Gilead can't possibly fall in just one more episode, and I can't envision June getting Hannah out either. The most important thing for me is that every major character here has faced their own moment of truth and either rose to the occasion like Lawrence, Lydia, and Serena, or been taken out of the way like Nick and Wharton. I foresee June undertaking a long fight in the revolution, and she may never even get back to her daughter Holly in Alaska again. Not while Hannah is still trapped and Gilead is now a war zone. But it would be satisfying just to see June continue to fight the good fight in the finale, to be the heroine she's always been, and to see the show put the focus squarely back on the revolution, not on June's star-crossed romance with Nick. And June could actually die for real, since this story has always been from her perspective, which gave her plot armor that will be gone in the finale. So, what do you think of this epic finale and all of the characters who face their own personal moments of truth? Are you satisfied with the direction the show has taken as it comes to the end of its incredible 6-season run? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. And until next time, keep on deep diving and let's see what we can uncover together.